welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everybody. I am Evelyn from the Syosset Public Library's Turn the Page podcast. And with me today, I have Melanie Benjamin, the author of The Children's Blizzard. And we are talking to her today on the day the book comes out. So it's January 12th, which is also the day of The Children's Blizzard. So the name of the book is The Children's Blizzard. I know you guys can't see the cover, but I love it. It's a great cover. I love the book. I started reading it and could not stop. I could not put it down for 1 second. I did have to feed dinner to everybody in the family, so I had to stop at one point, but I just love the book so much. So Melanie, thank you so much for joining us. Melanie is a New York Times bestselling author of historical fiction. This, I believe, is her 7th historical fiction book. I did read The Aviator's Wife, which I absolutely loved. And not only did I love it, I did it as a book discussion here at the Syosset Public Library. That's how much I loved it. So I'd like to introduce everybody to Melanie Benjamin. Thank you so much, Melanie, for coming on with us. So can you just tell everybody what The Children's Blizzard is about?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. The Children's Blizzard. On this day in history, January 12th, 1888, 133 years ago, a devastating blizzard swept the Great Plains, and it hit right as schools were letting out. And this is why it is known to history as the Children's Blizzard. It was a day that had dawned surprisingly warm. So people were out after a period of a really long cold spell. So children were in school for the first time in several days, and people were out on the prairie running errands, going to town, and not very adequately dressed. So it is known as the Children's Blizzard because, as I said, it struck right when school was letting out. So many of its victims tragically were children and their school teachers, who were not much more than children themselves, young girls who were 15 or 16, just out of the classroom, who suddenly had to make life and death decisions in an instant. Should they send the children home and try to hope they would outrun this blizzard, or should they keep them inside these really poorly insulated schoolhouses and risk freezing to death waiting for rescue? So I created a novel around this actual historic event, focusing on 2 sisters, both school teachers in separate districts, who make very different decisions. And their decisions end up obviously having a huge impact on their lives and the lives of the students in their charge. And as I was researching this and writing this, it became also a novel, just not only a novel of survival against the elements, which it truly is, and a novel about sisters, and it became a novel about immigration, and because these were immigrants from Northern Europe, who are mostly in this area of the country. We're talking Nebraska and what was the Dakota Territory, who were homesteading during these very brutal years on the prairie. And it became a novel of school teachers, making life and death decisions in the classroom, which is kind of what we're seeing now as well. And also a novel about fake news, because these immigrants were lured to this country through propaganda, basically passed off as news, articles placed in newspapers in Northern Europe and in the cities of the East, describing Nebraska and the Great Plains as a Garden of Eden with mild climate and anything would grow, and it was nothing like that. But mostly it's a story, of survival, and it's a diverse story because it wasn't only white people on the Great Plains in those years. So that's the book.
Yeah, it's fabulous. Like I said, I couldn't stop reading it. It's getting unbelievable reviews everywhere. It got a starred review at Booklist and other places. It's just wonderful. I can't recommend it enough. Everybody has to sit and read it. The sister story I loved. The survival I loved. The guy I really liked the best was the news reporter.
Gavin Woodson.
I loved him. I thought he was a great character. I thought he was fabulous. I loved him. Now,
I'm sorry. I was just going to say 3 of the characters, the 2 sisters and a little girl named Annette, They are based on some of the real people. They're
Okay.
I took some of there's a collection of oral histories of those who witnessed the storm that was published like in the 1930s. And so some elements of their characters and their stories are kind of drawn from reality. But Gavin was completely made up in my
Okay.
mind to represent the people who, wrote these false reports and kind of
Mhm.
were responsible for bringing people out here under false pretenses.
Right. So what was your research like? It must have been extensive. I mean, there's so much information.
I'm, I'm an armchair historian, so I'm always reading histories and nonfiction about our country, and so I certainly knew a lot about the homesteading years of the Great Plains, about the tragedy of us, what we did to the Native Americans whose land it first had
Right.
been. So I knew a lot about this era, but as far as the storm itself, I really only knew the name and kind of vaguely about it. So I read the excellent nonfiction book by David Laskin, which is also called The Children's Blizzard, because that is the name of the storm. It came out about, I think, 2005. And it gets into a lot more detail about the weather and the science of it. And the Army Signal Corps, which was kind of the first branch of the first version of the National Weather Service, and their mistakes and it was, they were in the beginning, the infancy of trying to predict weather, and they got it all wrong. And so he goes into a lot more detail about that. But I did read that, and also, like I said, that compilation of oral histories from the survivors. And beyond that, I reread a lot of Willa Cather because she writes so eloquently of Nebraska, her home state. And I've been in Nebraska quite a lot. I lived in Chicago for a lot of years. We just recently moved to Williamsburg, Virginia, but we had lived in Chicago, and my youngest son lived in Denver. So we drove through Nebraska quite a
Oh,
lot
okay.
to get to see him. You basically have to drive through the entire state of Nebraska to get to Colorado. And I knew Omaha. I'd been there several times. So yeah, it wasn't as much research as you would think, to be honest. I mean, I had to get the timeline right of when did this storm hit where, because this story takes place in northeastern Nebraska, southeastern, what is now South Dakota, and Omaha. And so though, I had to get the timeline right of when the storm hit. And, I had to get the details of the storm, how long it lasted, what the details of the weather were, how quickly the temperature dropped, all that kind of thing. But then it was just my imagination.
Well, your imagination was just wonderful, let me tell you. It was great. Now, as I was doing research about you, I wasn't stalking, just doing research.
Okay.
I found that you have a podcast also.
I do.
Who the hell are we? With Edward Kelsey Moore. It was great. I loved listening to it. You guys are fabulous together. So any of you listening, if you want to see more or hear more of Melanie Benjamin, find her podcast, Who the Hell Are We? It's great. How long have you guys been doing that?
We started, so Ed is an author as well, Edward Kelsey Moore. And
A New York Times bestselling author. You both made that very
author
clear.
of the Supremes Sing the Happy Heartache Blues and the Supremes at Earl's All You Can Eat. And he and I met at an event, and then we found out we were both born in Indianapolis. We were both, he is a cellist, but I started out in musical theater. So it turned out we had done a show together where he played in the pit orchestra and I was on stage.
Oh,
and
wow.
we both ended up in Chicago, where that's where we were when we met. So we just discovered we had so much in common. And then we both became writers late in life. And in fact, I won a short story contest, and he played the cello in the string orchestra at the ceremony for it. And that was one of the turning points in his life where he decided he wanted to be an author, not a cellist. And so it's just, and we just became really good friends. And he and his husband and me and my husband, we get together, and we decided to do the podcast just because we just had so much fun talking about books and theater and music and life. And we started it about 2 years ago now. And then when the pandemic hit, we could no longer get together to do it, even we both still lived in Chicago. So we started doing it virtually. And then it kind of involved, we started watching a lot of movies during the
Right.
pandemic, a lot of old movies. So now the podcast has evolved to movies and books. So we watch an old movie and then we kind of gossip about it on the podcast a lot and talk about a lot about the history of Hollywood and the tidbits behind it. And then we talk about books that we think kind of tie into the movie. So that's what we've become.
Yeah, it's a great podcast. Very, very entertaining. So your website is great. I mean, there's so much information on there about the Children's Blizzard. You write all that also?
Yeah, I do. That's a funny thing. People
Wow.
think magic. They think websites appear by magic, but every
Right.
word on that
A
website
lot
has
of
been
work.
written by me. And so, yes, for every book, I have a behind the book page that goes more in depth about the history of the book. So I talk a lot more about the Homestead Act and what happened to the Indian Wars, that happened to clear the Native Americans off their home soil and all that. And then there's a reading group guide that just got put up there too. So yeah, the website is a big resource if you choose the book for a book club, and I think it's a good book for a book club.
Yeah, I was going to say it's going to be a great book club book.
I mean, it's about ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances.
Just like now.
Yeah, it really, there are a lot of parallels. I finished the book a year ago, so it was pre-pandemic.
Right.
But there are a lot of things that resonate now. Somebody described it, a reader described it as Stephen King meets Little House on the Prairie. And I thought that was a really good description because there is a thriller aspect to this with the storm. And,
sure.
Will they survive? Will they not survive? The storm is the villain, the menace. But then, yes, it is also about the homestead and, that life on the prairie. And it's a lot more realistic than Little House on the Prairie was. So the website is, I've got a lot of resources for you if you want to find out more about the book. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's really great. And we're very lucky right now to have such great weather people out there telling us when these blizzards are coming, as opposed to what they had to deal with back then. I mean,
that's one of the things I hope people understand from the book is that we live in a world where we get a text alert, right? If there's any kind of weather warning. And these were, back then, like I said, the Army Signal Corps was in charge of what they called indicating the weather. They didn't even use the word predict or forecast. And it was so primitive. Really, all they could do was people telegraph in readings like temperature change and barometric pressure and wind direction. And at certain times of day, these individual outposts would telegraph all this information into, it was right before the blizzard, just one office in Washington, D.C. And then they would chart all the readings on a big map. From that, they would indicate the weather for the next 24 hours and then telegraph it back to the towns and all these outposts. And the only way they could really convey this information to the people, on the plains was it would run in newspapers. And also there would be a series of flags that would be hoisted up above, railroad stations that would kind of indicate what the weather forecast was going to be. But so many people did not live in sight of those railroad stations and or didn't take a newspaper. And of course, by the time it even got out there, the weather, it was all already out of date. And they had just opened up a new office in St. Paul, Minnesota, right before the blizzard to try to get the indications out west faster. The railroads were really on their case because the railroads were very much impacted by the weather and they wanted to know. And so that had just happened right before the blizzard started, but still they didn't indicate the blizzard. They missed it. But even if they had gotten it right, it's very doubtful there was any way to tell people, especially the homesteaders.
Especially because the weather was so warm that morning. So everybody they were excited to finally be able to get out and not be all bundled up from the previous days before when it was so freezing cold without the blizzard. It was just such cold there.
Yeah, there'd been a long cold snap that kept people, this period of really brutal weather on the Great Plains. I think if you've ever read the Little House on the Prairie books, this period of time. It's the tail end of what they call the Little Ice Age. And the weather on the Great Plains, and of course this is other than the Native Americans, the white people who were there are all new to this land. And the weather is still today notoriously unpredictable, with the Rocky Mountains really affecting those cold fronts that came in from the north and then that Gulf air kind of rising up. And it's still Tornado Alley today. The weather is wild, and it was even more so in those years where you would have the grasshopper, plagues raining down from the sky, eating the crops, and the floods and the fires, and these and ridiculously brutal winters. There is the book in the series called The Long Winter, where Laura Ingalls Wilder just talks about the year where it was just endless blizzard after blizzard after blizzard. And that is not the same year as the children's blizzard. I think that was the winter of 1881-82, but it's still the same time period. It just kind of indicates just how just wild and brutal and punishing the weather was in those years in the Great Plains.
It's amazing that anybody stayed.
A lot of them went home.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things we don't know. In this particular time period, talking like 1870s, 1880s, more homesteaders gave up and went home than
They
stayed. It wasn't until like around the turn of the 20th century that they started to figure out how to dry land farming techniques, because especially those who came over from Sweden and from Germany and from Norway, they did not know how to farm. The normal way of farming, even in the Midwest, did not apply to the Great Plains because it was an inland desert. They learned dry farming techniques around the 1900s. That made more people stay. And then they discovered the great Ogallala Aquifer. But before that, we had the Dust Bowl in the same area. Right.
Right.
But now it's the breadbasket of America, right? But it's because of the Ogallala Aquifer beneath it, and that is drying up faster than it can be replenished. So
that's the problem.
Yeah. So at some time in the future, I think it will be a desert again.
Oh, wow. That's too bad.
Yeah.
Hopefully they have other means to support themselves other than farming.
The Homestead Act was really about trying to get individual farmers, right? The idealistic American farmer with the small family farm in the family for generations came about because of the Homestead Act. But then, in more recent decades, corporations have been buying up the farms, and so that the individual farmer today has a really tough time making a living.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So maybe the Dust Bowl is your next book?
I don't think so. But I thought originally of maybe making this a dual timeline book with the Dust Bowl, because the children of the Children's Blizzard would have been grandparents during the time of the Dust Bowl. So
Okay.
I thought there certainly would have been parallels there, but I thought of doing that, a dual timeline book with the Dust Bowl and the Blizzard, but then I decided just to concentrate on the Blizzard.
Okay.
It was
so
enough.
what are you working on? Huh?
It was enough. It was a big enough story.
Right. I think Kristen Hanna's new book is The Dust Bowl.
Yeah.
Right.
I think
so I guess you had similar thought processes going there.
Yeah.
Have any of your books been optioned for movies? Are we going to see anything in the future?
No news right now.
Okay.
Nothing I can share, nothing concrete. There's always interest in things, but at this point, nothing's in the works, but maybe someday.
So how have you been during this pandemic?
Well, we moved, which was, I don't know that I recommend moving in a pandemic. It was really interesting, but we were in Chicago for 25 years, the last 6 years of that in the city of Chicago. And the pandemic, in the unrest and everything, it hit the city hard, it hit our neighborhood hard. And just, we had been thinking of moving somewhere a little bit warmer, a little bit more reasonable cost of living. And at some point, and I think the pandemic just made us say now, if not now, when? We've kind of gotten a whole seize the day kind of attitude coming out of the pandemic. That's how it's affected us. Don't put off things because you just never know. And so we decided we're just going to move where we want to move now. And so we moved to Williamsburg, Virginia. And I had really missed a garden. I had missed being able to go for a walk and not run into 1,000 people. I love Chicago, and I cannot wait to go back and visit. One of my sons is still there. And but we're very happy. It's a little more peaceful, a little more quiet. We can get out more. There's a lot more sun here than there was in Chicago. And I'm looking forward to gardening.
And how is getting a book out during the pandemic?
Well, yeah, it's a challenge, and thank you so much for providing.
You're so welcome.
It's certainly a challenge now that so many bookstores are closed for browsing. There are a lot of them are doing curbside pickup, but you can't go in and just browse. And Barnes and Noble has had the same problems with it, and libraries too. And the world has been a little bit busy, and I don't think a lot of people have had are really finding their books in the news anymore. So it's been a challenge. But I think publishers and libraries and bookstores and the authors have really stepped up. We are really elevating each other and supporting each other in these last few months in a way I have never experienced in the past. We're all banding together to help each other out. And that's just a lovely thing that has happened. So, fingers crossed, you write the best book you can do. I know when people read it, they'll love it. It's just the challenge of getting them to find out about it. That's the challenge in these days.
Right. So you'll be speaking with I saw your list of places you're going to virtually be going.
Yeah, I have
so
a lot of
speaking
virtual
with other
events.
authors, I see, and bookstores and other libraries.
Normally I'd be on the road right now, and that's a challenge. That's so different. I'm always used to book tour, packing up my suitcase and hitting the road for a couple of weeks. And now we're home, but we're doing it virtually. And the nice thing about this is that anyone, wherever they are, can tune in to see me. You don't have to be in the city I'm going to be at. And like I said, I'm doing these events in partnership with other authors who have given me their time so generously. Authors like Paula McLean and Christina Baker-Klein and Kate Quinn and Elizabeth Willets. We're all doing events together. Some of the first one is tonight.
Great.
On the 12th at Fountain Books with Greer McAllister. So
we spoke with Greer.
Oh, did you? Yeah, because her book,
we did.
Very similar, very cold book. And
Fury.
Yeah, and so if you'd like to check out my website, I have information about all these events. They start on the 12th and go through the end of next week and a couple past that. And some of them require registration in advance. And if somebody wants a signed copy of the book, that's the way to go too. All these bookstores that are hosting me, when you register for the event, you have a chance to buy a signed book copy. They're the only ones that have them. I signed 820 book plates over the holidays. So I couldn't sign all the books. Just with the pandemic and shipping, we just couldn't do it that way. So I signed 820 book plates and sent them to these hosting and some of them are libraries as well. So the hosting libraries and bookstores for my virtual events. So if you want a signed copy, those are the places to go to get them.
That's just wonderful. Wow. Yeah. Arm must have been quite tired after that.
Yeah, but you said this is the thing we have become, and publishers too, Random House, they have become so creative. This is a challenging time, but I have to say I'm very impressed by how creative and resourceful everyone has been.
Who blurbed for your book? I have an advanced reader copy. It doesn't have a blurb on it.
Oh, goodness.
You have a copy that?
Yeah, I got, let's see, Lisa Wingate gave me
a wow.
Yeah. Christina Baker-Klein, Jean Kwok, author of Searching for Sylvie Lee, and Elizabeth Letts, who's a good friend of mine, Allison Pataki, Sarah McCoy, and Peter Guy, who is a Minnesota writer, who is a friend of mine. He writes wonderful books about Minnesota, and this one is, kind of set in the same time area.
Right. Yeah, I'm not familiar with him, but I'll check him out. What's his name again?
Peter Guy, Geye. A Minnesota writer, and so I was very, very lucky, and it was an Indie Next pick and a Library Reads pick. Thank you, librarians, for that.
Yes, Library Reads, we love them.
And Oprah Magazine said it was one of the most anticipated historical novels. Washington Post said it was one of the top 10 books in January. So yeah, I've been very, very lucky.
I think that's going to get the word out for sure. All those. Yeah, no, and I will certainly be handing it to plenty of patrons.
No, thank you so much.
They will be, and I'll go back to your back books also, and your backlist, and also hand those out because I think your books are great. Really appreciate it. So what book are you working on now? What's the next project coming up?
I took a year off. I had planned, which I've not done at all since I started writing. This is my 7th historical novel, published since 2010. And there are a couple of books that I wrote within that time that I decided not to publish. So I've been writing pretty much nonstop. And I was at a book festival a few years ago with Nancy Horan, who wrote Loving Frank. And
Absolutely. Fabulous book.
and she told me, she said, I don't know how you do it. She says, don't you ever want to take a break? And when she said that, I was like, yeah, I kind of do. So I had always planned that after I turned in the Children's Blizzard, I was going to take a year off.
Yeah.
And I think that's necessary sometimes when you're a creative person, right? You don't want to.
Teachers get sabbaticals, so.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't want to get stale, and I don't want to keep writing the same book over and over. I always truly want to push myself creatively. So I took this year off anyway. Of course, it turned out to be the year of the pandemic. And almost every author I know who really did try to write this year, I didn't have to create anything this year. I worked on edits for this book, but I didn't have to create anything. And everyone I know has had a real hard time creating during this time period, not just with the pandemic, but everything else going on in our country. So so I haven't been working for a year. I just now, and getting back into it, once the children's book Blizzard is out there and I'm done with all these events, I'm going to sit back down again. And I wanted to take the time to find a subject that really, really touched me and moved me the way the Children's Blizzard did, that really inspired me. I'm so proud of this book in a way I don't think more than my other books. And so I really wanted to find another subject that grabbed me that way. And so I think I found it. But I really started it a little bit, but it's not enough to talk about yet.
Okay, well, we look forward to the day when it is enough to talk about. What did you do before you were writing historical fiction?
Oh, I was a mom.
Okay.
PTA president, stay-at-home mom. My first passion was theater. So that's what I wanted to go off to New York and study. And my parents didn't support me. This is a long, long time ago. Yeah. So I ended up going to community college, ended up dropping out of that, doing a lot of theater in Indianapolis. Like I said, that in my paths crossed with my friend Edward Kelsey Moore, although I didn't know it. And it wasn't until I was almost 40, which was quite a while ago now, that a friend of mine said, I always thought you'd be a writer. But I was always a reader and loved libraries. I lived at the library, first at the Bookmobile. That's what we had when I was growing up. Mm-hmm. And then they finally built a branch of the library nearby, and that was my refuge. And I read all the time, but I never thought of writing. Even though it always came very easily to me for school and things like that. But when she said that, I sat down and gave it a whirl.
Wow.
And after some starts and stops and early success and early failure and heartbreak and, all this fun stuff, I finally, became a New York Times bestselling author when I was in my 50s. So
wow. What was the first book that was the New York Times bestselling book?
The Aviator's Wife.
It was. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, and then The Swans of Fifth Avenue was my next one. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That was great. So what have you been reading during this pandemic?
Yeah, I've had a hard time reading. I don't know. A lot of people say they haven't. I've been reading a lot of British novels, which is kind of my comfort food reading. Older out of print novels that are hard to find now, but some of them are being reissued. Books by D.L. Stevenson and Angela Thirkell, who writes a whole series of small village life books between the wars and up to World War II. And those I've been reading a lot. But I have read some really good fiction. I loved Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. Did you read that one?
I haven't read it, but I've heard wonderful things about it.
She has been one of my longtime favorite authors, and I've read all her books. And this was the one that really became a big hit here in the United States this year, and I'm so happy. And it was just beautiful. I've read, like I said, I've been reading all these D.E. Stevenson and Angela Thirkell books. At the Time of Our Singing by Richard Powers, who recently won, wasn't it the National Book Award for the Overstory? Mm-hmm. This was an earlier novel of his called The Time of Our Singing, which was just tremendous. Interior Chinatown, I read the book. It was very good. I've read a lot of biographies. I do read a lot of movie star biographies. There was an excellent Cary Grant one that just came out, and I read that. And just quickly looking at my list here. We read a lot of books for the podcast, and a lot of them are movie tie-ins. So I read Valley of the Dolls for the first time this year. Reread Peyton Place. I've been doing a lot of rereads, actually. So yeah, I still read a lot, but I think my reading has been a little, I don't know, I've been doing a lot more streaming than reading.
Right.
Watching endless TV, home and garden shows. My husband and I are like completely obsessed with HGTV and real estate shows. So we've been doing a lot of that too in the pandemic.
Right. I enjoyed it.
It's affected us all, our ability to concentrate, what we want to read, what we don't want to read. I was a little worried having a book that's, it's not a light, fluffy read, but
Yeah.
I think it does make you feel all the emotions. I will say that, all of the emotions. Yes,
And what we're feeling now.
exactly.
I think there's definitely a parallel to what they went through and what we're going through, the unknown. And
right. And I think it's a cathartic read because of that, because it kind of cleanses you of all these feelings. Yes, there's tragedy, but there's also triumph and courage and love and hope and sadness, but it's everything. It's all the feels, as the kids say these days. And so I think in that aspect, and I have been, like, the Hamnet was the same way, and so was The Time of Our Singing, and I really like those kind of books right now because, like I said, it's kind of cleansing to experience all these emotions because of a work of fiction instead of the reality that we're living in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. So I thank you so much for speaking with us, Melanie Benjamin, and I hope everybody who's listening, if you are a Syosset library patron, you will either come to the library and get the physical book, or you can look on Overdrive. It's there. You can take it out from there. The audiobook is also available. Do you listen to audiobooks? Is that something you're interested in? When you take a nice walk in the nice weather down in Virginia?
No, I don't. I don't like to listen to anything when I'm walking. I actually get a lot of ideas for writing while I'm walking. Those are sometimes the best ideas, the best creative, inspirations and things happen to me while I'm walking. So I kind of like to keep I don't want noise in my head. I want my head clear for that. But I've heard a little bit of the audiobook. They always send me like 3 files of the actors they have in mind for it, the voice actors, and then I get to choose from those. And so I chose Cassandra Campbell, and she's so talented. And I still don't have the audiobooks. They haven't sent them yet to me, but I've only heard good things about it.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I am a big audiobook person, so I love audiobooks. But because it didn't come out till today, this one I read, but I will go back and get a snippet and listen to the audiobook because I love them, and I think this one would definitely be great on audio.
I've heard great things, like I said.
Okay, so I think we're going to wrap it up. So I thank you so much. I wish you all the best with this book on the publishing date. So, and good luck with all your wonderful virtual author visits that you have throughout the week and next week. And we'd love to speak to you again when the next book comes out, if we can.
It would be my privilege. And thank you so much for hosting me today.
Okay, so this is Evelyn signing off from Turn the Page podcast, and we were lucky enough to have with us today Melanie Benjamin, best-selling author of The Children's Blizzard. Thank you so much, Melanie. We really appreciate it.
And thank you.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.